Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Dr. Spotfire live session, the monthly session for May. I'm Jose Oliveira from Spotfire, and I have with me Peter McInnes, Spotfire Architects. Peter, you want to say hi to the audience?
Hello, everybody. Looking forward to talking with you today.
Okay, sounds good. So before we get started, let me share my screen and we go over some basic stuff. The introduction and the session for today is caching in Spotfire. So what's Spotfire, for those that don't know, is a visual data science platform that helps smart people rapidly create interactive visual analytics applications to solve complex industry problems. So Spotfire is not just a tool, it's not an analytical or data science tools, it's a platform that has a lot of features and potential for the enterprise ready. And who is Dr. Spotfire? We are a team of three. I'm Jose Aguirre, and then we have Tara and Boris. And we have these office hours once a month, every month, the first Tuesday of every month. So how does the Dr. Spotfire works? Well, it's not just monthly sessions and quick tip videos. It's more about feedback from you guys from the Spotfire IDS portal or through community or social media chats or even email. We get your input and then that translates, because we talk internally in the Spotfire team with product manager, the data scientists and developers, and we can create custom visualizations to address specific needs or data functions or Spotfire applications, accelerators, data connectors, and articles. There's a lot of articles in the community, and you're also welcome. Most of the input we get is from Spotfire community, so I encourage you to all join the Spotfire community. Our motto is learning is not driven by answers, but by questions. So please keep the questions coming. And I'm going to do a brief parenthesis. This is a new platform, and the only way we can get your feedback for now is through YouTube. So jump into our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and search for Dr. Spotfire, and you should be able. And it's also better quality if you go through YouTube instead of LinkedIn. We stream YouTube and LinkedIn. Here's a quick confidentiality slide that is required, but I'm not going to go over it. So let's kick it off. We only have 30 minutes, and Peter McInnes and Jose Aguirre, the floor is yours, Peter. Let me share your screen instead. Okay.
Thank you, Jose. So we're going to go over, as Jose said, we're going to talk about caching in Spotfire, and then we're not going to go into details or show like necessarily configuration of things. We're going to give you some resources to look at, but we're just going to kind of introduce the subject and how this is done throughout Spotfire. So first off, we'll go through an overview, and then we'll talk about the various topics that are on here on the list, and we'll show how to we'll show how to do things at the initial level. Again, we're not going to show any complete demos or anything, but we'll provide you with some information to get started with. So first off, just to start off with, we're going to talk about an overview. So just so people are aware of the various components in Spotfire, if you're used to just using maybe the Analyst client or other components of Spotfire. So the clients up here, the Spotfire server is kind of the brains of the operation. Doing authentication, authorization, handling traffic. We're going to be talking about the web player today. So that's where users in the web browser. That's where they're interacting with analysis files. If those, if they're working as they're working in the browser, the analysis files are loaded in the web player. Automation services is a service for running jobs, and we'll talk about how those can be useful in caching. So like a job may be opening an analysis file, sending an email, sending a PDF, images of the analysis file, or as we'll talk about today, maybe exporting data or taking a snapshot of data. The other services, we won't be talking about those as much today, but these are the kind of data function services, so Python, R, and Tear. So first off, one of the first places that people cache data is in the Spotfire web player. So this can be done with what we call scheduled updates. So you can schedule an analysis and its data to be loaded at a particular time, and you can also have it be updated, throughout the day at every so minutes, every so hours or something, if that data in the backend data source is updating as well. You can also use cache what we call SPDF. So this SPDF stands for the Spotfire binary data format. So those are files that are a binary representation of the data in Spotfire, and those can be used in various places throughout the system, and we'll be talking about them in various places to cache them. But one of the places is you can cache them in the web player. You can preload them into the web player if multiple analyses use the same SPDF. This was initially done and thought about for geocoding files. So if someone uses the same geocoding files across various analysis files, those can be preloaded in the web player and don't have to be loaded by each analysis file. The next kind of thing we'll be talking about is caching is embedded files, embedded in Spotfire analysis files, or again SPDF into the Spotfire library or onto disk. And this can be done manually in the Spotfire client, so you can export to the Spotfire library or export to disk. Or it can also be, as we were talking about with automation services, can be set up as a job to run, and you can trigger those jobs, or you can schedule them, and things like that. So these can be saved in the Spotfire, again, to disk or to the Spotfire database. The next thing we'll talk about is caching information links. So this is the information links, just so we kind of a brief aside, Analyst, web player, automation services. But you can cache an information link for a particular amount of time, or trigger it. And that way the data you're not pulling from the data source every time. Then some other ones that are all kind of on the client side. So again, the Analyst, web player, automation services, these are all clients of data and of analysis files. Our data connector, so the data connection results, those can be cached. There's also on-demand caching and data function caching. And these last ones, so the information links, the data connection, on-demand, and data function caching, these are all based on, usually the caches are based on some input value. So for example, if you have a parameterized information link, those parameters, that cache is only based on the parameters that have been entered. And the same is true for some of the other caching. And these are all different layers. So kind of the scheduled updates, the first one I mentioned, that's kind of like the closest to the data. So closest to the user. So that's everything's in memory. A user goes in the web player, the data is all there. The analysis file just comes right up, and they're ready to go. Again, and that's useful, for people in the web browser. Kind of the next layer, the embedded files, that's kind of a little bit step back. So you have to load those, those SPDF files or the embedded files. The user has to wait for them to load. Again, that's usually faster than going back to the data source, because you've already pulled the data into Spotfire. So Spotfire's already processed that data, whether it be embedded or the SPDF file. And then as you go on, again, this is useful for Analyst users. So Analyst users can use that. And then as you go on, again, information links caching to disk. Again, that's a little bit closer to the user. Pull that in. And then the last ones, those are actually all on the client, but they're very specific. So data connection, again, on demand, and data function, they only last as long as the user session is going on, unless you're in the web player, whereas in some cases, for data connection stuff, they can be shared between users on the web player. So we have, and then last but not least is what we call Spotfire Advanced Data Services, or TDV. You can cache data in there, and it has very advanced caching features. And we're not going to actually talk about that today, because we could do a whole session on that. But there's also a really good knowledge base article on the support system that gives an overview of the various caching options in Spotfire. And I suggest that it's linked here in the slides, and I suggest you look at that article, and then also it has drill downs to other details. Well, I have a lot of slides here. I'm actually going to be flipping over and kind of showing some of this in action. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole process of caching and kind of showing what it does and everything, but I'm just going to walk through how you configure these, or how you can kind of where things are in the interface and things like that. So I'm logged in here as an admin, so I get to see everything on the I get to see everything. And as far as, so I'm going to start as we kind of went through. in the overview, I'm going to start with scheduled updates. So that's under scheduling and routing. We're not going to talk about routing today. There's some good sections in the documentation, but just as a kind of a quick discussion about routing, allows you to route scheduled or based on rules to different web players based on like analysis or user or groups. Typically, it's done by analysis file, so maybe group all your might have all your critical reports on one web player, or you might want to spread out analyses and have all your large analysis files onto various web players. But here we're going to just focus more on just the scheduling component of it. So I'll go in here. I said I wanted to do a rule by an analysis file. So I choose an analysis file. Click OK, and then I can click. I can add a schedule. I can either use a save schedule. So I have various saved schedules here, and you can see how they're set up. I'm going to just in the interest of time, I'm going to show the how to create a schedule. So you can set a schedule for the various days. So maybe you don't want to load it on the weekends. You can set when it loads in the morning. So maybe your data source finishes loading at 6 a.m. So you want people to have it ready. So maybe set it up at 6:30, and you want to have it ready when users come in the morning. Maybe you don't want to keep it in all the time, so you want to take it out during the nighttime. You can again, like I said, you can update it with data every so often. You can based on hours or minutes, or if the data doesn't change in the data source at all during the day, you can just set it to not load at all. One thing to be aware of, just to think about, obviously, if you are loading data throughout the day, and your data source is getting updated, if it takes 30 minutes to load the data, you obviously need to make sure you give your each schedule at least 30 minutes to an hour for it to finish loading. You can also trigger these externally. So there's a web service you can call, and so if you have for example, if you have a data load that's occurring, and usually that maybe finishes at 4 a.m. in the morning, but sometimes it finishes at 5 a.m. So you don't know when to exactly schedule the schedule in Spotfire. You can actually trigger that. You can call it with an external service and say, load the data now. So if you have a script or something that you're running that's controlling that data load or knows when it finishes, you can again trigger the scheduled update to load at that time. And again, this loads the entire analysis. We can see that you do have some options as far as in the advanced here about whether things are pre-computed or not. But this is a very key feature of Spotfire. Most customers, all customers tend to use this. Obviously, there's a balance between, you can't load all your analysis files into memory, or you probably run on memory in the web players. But you do want to load like the critical ones, the ones that maybe take a long time to load if you have slow data sources or a lot of data. But it's a very useful feature that customers use quite a bit. So now we're going to move on to the next level was caching in what we call Analyst or automation services. This is pretty simple. This is just either saving data to a file or data to the library. I can choose which data table to store. I can also, if I want to, I can choose when I save the analysis, I can choose if I want to save the data embedded or not. I can choose how it's saved. I guess this data is already embedded, so maybe that's not a good choice. But you can save the data embedded, and what that does is it saves the data in the analysis file. So if I go to Data Connect or data table properties here, we can see the differences of things. So you have linked data or embedded in the analysis, so I can set that up here. If it's embedded, again, it won't pull from the data source. Again, this is a good option if you have large data sources that the Analyst users, so the thick client that I'm working with, the desktop client that I'm working with. It can also be useful, for web player users. But in this case, you're pulling the data into Spotfire and storing it in the library. So you can also schedule this, like I was talking about. So this is Automation Services Job Builder. So I can open analysis from the library. I can export data table to library, export data to file, or I can also save the analysis to library, and then I can embed the data in the analysis. So again, this is kind of another step back. The scheduled updates, the data is already in memory. Here, the data is again closer to Spotfire, but not quite completely in memory. It still has to be loaded, but it's a lot faster because you're not running those queries. The next thing we'll look at is where you set up information link caching. That's in Information Designer. So you can either get to that from the flyout menu or from the Data Information Designer. So if I go to an information link, and go down to the bottom, you can see that there's options for caching down here. So I can set this to cacheable. And then I can either give it a timeout or a validation query. The validation query is a query that needs to return a single column, and if that column changes, then that's when the data goes.
Okay, so Peter, in other words, if someone makes the same request, it won't go to the database to get the data because it's the same information.
Correct. If there's two analysis files using the same information link, then it won't go to the data source again. A couple things about this: if I have any parameters set up or any other conditions that might be dependent on user input, then the cache is created for each value. So if I have a region, like, and I choose West and then I choose East, and that's two different caches.
But if you request, for example, you select the West region, and I then go after again and select the West region, he's not going to pull it from the database.
No, it's not going to pull it from the data source. It's going to pull it from the cache.
Yeah.
So this is another step. Another place to cache. Again, it's not completely in memory, but it's right there on disk and very quickly to read. And you just have to think about, like, where is your, if you're having something that's maybe loading slowly, or if you want something to load faster, like what's going to give you the best result? Is it the query? Is it the data source? Is it the query? Something like that. So kind of choosing what you're trying to optimize and take out of the equation. Were there any questions so far?
Not so far.
Okay. So the next piece is a data connection. So if I'm going to go to, data connections are connections directly from the client, so either the web player, automated services, or the analyst, to a data source. So these have some various performance settings that one needs to think about. So there's an option to cache the data. So again, this is based on what the user is doing. So as Jose and I were talking about, if I choose West and he chooses, and then I choose West again, it would do the same. It would get the same result. You can also have the option of sharing cache data between all users of the web client. So if Jose and I are both in the web client and we both choose the same value for the same connector, then instead of going to the data source, it would just pull that from memory. And as you see here, there's a little note here. If any of the data, if you have kind of roll-up security in place, you wouldn't want to cache the data between the users. You'd want to think about that. So here, as you can see, some of the settings, you can either have it cache after a particular amount of time, or have the cache expire after a particular amount of time, or have the cache expire a particular day. Either all the days or a particular day of the week, and then a particular time. One thing to think about with this is to be aware, if you're also putting this analysis that's using some of this caching into scheduled updates, you kind of want to have those work together. So for example, if the scheduled update runs at 5 a.m. every morning, you want to make sure that the expiration date, and this is like 4 a.m. for example. So it does get fresh data for that. So then the last couple ones we'll flip over, or I'll do one more and then we'll flip over to this. So under the data table properties, I can choose to do on-demand data. I don't know how many, and in that case, you can also allow caching. So if you're familiar with on-demand data, it lets me define an input. So typically, you would have a details table, or sorry, an aggregated table. So maybe the sum of something, or like a bar chart, or a some sort of aggregated a summary table or a cross table or something like that, some aggregated data. And from that, you would choose an input. So for example, maybe all the the actors or something like that, in this case, and you would define that as an input to your on-demand table. Now you can cache that on-demand table, and this is fine to do as long as the data underneath it isn't changing, because obviously if you're caching, you wouldn't get any new data. You would always get the same data, as long as you selected the same input, or in this case, actors or actresses, you would get the same input. You would get the same cache, and if the data is changing the data source, you wouldn't read that. So it's just something to be aware of. That's something to be aware of in all these caches. Obviously, Spotfire doesn't send a query to the data source and say, "Have you changed?" Except in the like the information link validation query example. Most of the other ones, Spotfire is relying on you as the one configuring it to know when your data is updating and whether you want fresh data all the time, or whether using the cache is fine. In most cases, I've seen customers tend to update their data every day, or once a week. They don't update it during the day. I mean, there are some use cases where that does happen, but that's more rare than not. So
yeah, and that's what's important to understand how the data works and how fresh is the data and how.
Right, you have to be aware. Yeah, you just don't want to cache everything, but you need to be aware of how the data interacts with what you're caching. So I'm going to flip back over to most of these slides. We'll go through pretty quickly. Just one thing I want to point out, talking about scheduled updates. It does support personalized data. There's this article that discusses that. And again, as I said, there's various links here on the slides that you can read in more detail later on. Yeah, we went through all the caching, Spotfire Analyst and Automation Services, information link caching. One of the things about information link caching I didn't say, so the cache is to disk on the Spotfire server. It's encrypted, but it is per Spotfire server. So if you have multiple Spotfire servers, information link caching may not be the best option, because again, each Spotfire server has its own cache. Data connection caching, we went through this. Again, there's more details to go through here. And all these, all these kind of the reason behind caching is to limit your interaction with the backend data source. So, or to obviously to speed something up if a query is really slow. But in a lot of cases, you don't want to be hitting the data source. Every user that logs in doesn't need to hit the data source type thing. On demand caching, again, we went through this. And then Jose has something to talk about, some incremental caching that he has worked on.
Yeah, sure. So incremental caching is just a way to avoid reloading all the data. So if you have, for example, some log data and you have new records and none of the previous records have changed, you can always add a script. I have an article and a quick video on how to do that. I'm going to put the link on the description below after this session is recorded. But it requires some scripting. The scripting will basically going to add transformations to append the rows from one data table to another. One data table is configured to on-demand, and it's going to look for new records. And the script is going to create that transformation to append the rows. If you look at let me change the layout. You can see at the bottom, the green ones. Every time I check after each transformation, you can see that it's only appending the new rows. But more detail can be found in the article and the video that I have there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a really interesting thing. And we've seen other customers use on demand to pull the data in, to pull new rows in. You can also kind of use, that's one thing, you can use a lot of these things together. So for example, you can load scheduled updates in the morning, and then maybe that's all like if you have the data up to today, for example, but then the data is changing throughout the day, you can maybe just load the rows that have changed during the day. So you're only loading a few, whatever.
Exactly. And you can use automation services to trigger that script and append those rows.
Right. So yeah, there's a lot of different, we only have so much time, so we can't go through everything today. But there's a lot of different things you can think about if you get creative with kind of merging some of these features together that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Last thing is data function caching. Again, this is similar to the other caching as far as, but one thing you have to do, so data functions are, Python or inter scripts. In this case, it's not just the data that you have to be thinking about whether it changes or not. You also have to think about the model or your script, your data function script itself. If there's any possibility that your script has randomness in it for some reason, maybe it's some sort of model that might change over time or might be different depending on, then you don't want to cache it. You just want to run it every time. But there is the option to allow caching when you're setting up the data function if you don't think that the model is going to change at all.
Yeah.
So that's just
so again, for example, if Peter sends a parameter to that data function that happens to be the same parameter, of course, maybe a region or something else, and the data function takes a long time to compute, you can cache that. So that result is already given by the first person, in this case, Peter, and then I will get the results back immediately.
Yeah, Jose, that's right. Yeah, it's also, this has, as you can see, I didn't show the input parameters, but input parameters are also, it's also keyed off, what you put into it, similar to the other ones. So that's it. We have, again, we'll put these links in the appropriate place so you can, review them afterwards. They go into details about, like we didn't, while we showed kind of the interface of things, we didn't go through the back-end details about, there are some configurations for certain things that we didn't talk about completely, but those are in the articles. So hopefully, this will get you started and you can drill down into some of the other information that we provide.
Awesome.
Is there any?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. If there are any questions, now is the time to ask the questions. Again, sorry for that, but the only way to get the questions over is through YouTube. So if not, there's not a problem. This presentation is recorded. We always record. If you go to our page, you will see all the previous recorded. You can always ask questions. You can send us an email and stuff like that. So this is the URL, youtube.com/Dr. Spotfire. That's our channel, and that's going to be changed. We're going to change. We're just testing this platform, but eventually you will be able to send to LinkedIn and to YouTube, which are the platforms that we stream out from. And you can get a hold to us, as I said at the beginning, social media, the Spotfire community, or even email by sending an email at dr@spotfire.com, and just share what you have. If you have any suggestions for new demos or data functions, scripts, mods, or maybe a quick tip video or some other topic that you want us to cover, just feel free to send it to us and we'll be happy to answer. And if you have questions for this specific topic, then again, comments and questions are also welcome in the comments of YouTube or LinkedIn. And that's all. Thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you next time. Next topic is going to be about Spotfire connectors. So all different type of connectors that we have in our June session. All right. See you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.